Good morning, and welcome to the UCLA Mildred E. Mathias Botanical Garden. We're very pleased that you could join us today for another talk in our public lecture series. I think you're going to find that today's presentation is both stimulating and helpful. So I'm Victoria Sork. I'm director of the garden, and I'm a professor in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. The botanical garden is comprised of 7 acres of plants that represent ecosystems from around the world and approximately 1,800 species. Our mission is to support the educational and research mission of UCLA and to provide a place of respite for the campus and local communities. I wish you could enjoy the garden today, but I'm happy that you can at least share the experience by attending this presentation. Before this event begins, we want to acknowledge the Gabriela Tongva peoples as the traditional land caretakers of the Tovangar, which is the Los Angeles Basin and Southern Channel Islands. We pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and relatives and relations, past, present, and emerging, of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. So thank you again for coming today, and now let me introduce you to Ms. Jules Cooch. She's the manager of public outreach and education, and she's the person that's responsible for all the wonderful talks we present through the year. And so she will now introduce today's speaker and event.
Hi, thank you so much, Victoria. Yes, welcome everyone. I'm so glad you could join us today. And for those of you who caught Deb's lecture in September, I think you know what you're in for. This is going to be great. And this will be a little more applied and hands-on. And for those of you who are just joining for the first time, welcome. We're really excited to have everyone here today. A couple of things, if you like this event, if you want to know more about what we get up to here at the Botanical Garden, you can follow us on social media. I'm also going to pop up here real quick. Anything that you create today, you can tag, when you post it on social media, our social media is UCLA Botanical, or you can tag MEMBG. And we will be sharing some of our favorite things on social media over the coming week. These are also ways you can stay connected with us. On our website too, you can sign up for our newsletter. And if you love what you see here, most of the programming we provide is free to the public. So if you want to help support free educational programming about nature and plants, you can also donate on our website and help keep this garden free for everyone to enjoy. We'll also be doing a little bit of Q&A with Deborah during the talk. So I know some of you have found the comments. Go ahead and you can add questions in there. Some of them will kind of intersperse during the talk. And then at the end, we'll have a little extra time to chat with Deb. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to the wonderful Deborah Shaw. Deborah has a degree in fine art and has also studied botany. And specifically native California flora. She is the principal of DB Shaw Studios, an award-winning design firm, and her artwork has been displayed around the world. She's an active member of many professional organizations, including the American Society of Botanical Artists, the Botanical Artists Guild of Southern California, and the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators. So without further ado, I give you Deborah Shaw.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Jules. I wish today we could be at the gardens in person, but I'm glad we can get together online. This workshop is just a really quick dash overview about keeping a nature journal, and it's focused mainly on the plants that we find around us in the wild, in our gardens, in our homes, and growing in the sidewalk cracks. As Jules said, I'm going to talk for about 50 minutes and then have a chance to answer questions. But if you think of anything, go ahead and ask it during the talk, and I can go ahead and stop things or back up, and we can get your questions answered. If you'd like to draw during the talk, please feel free to do so. And I hope you've had the opportunity to download the handout. If not, please get in touch with Jules and she'll be able to get it to you. It's by no means an extensive handout, but it does contain a few notes that might be a helpful reference during the workshop and later after the workshop is over. So let's get started. The real question is, why a nature journal? And I get asked this question a lot, because a lot of people just snap a lot of photographs, and we'll talk about photographs in a little bit. But this quote sums it up best for me. I have learned that what I have not drawn, I have never really seen. And then when I start drawing an ordinary thing, I realize how extraordinary it is, a sheer miracle. So there are benefits to you as an individual, to your community, and to future generations. So I'm going to stop here and talk about a little bit about those. As an individual, nature journaling changes how we see the world around us and how we think. Because frankly, we spend most of our time looking and not seeing. So a drawing forces us to slow down and really observe and really look. And I get asked all the time, why not just take a photograph? A photograph is not the same thing as a drawing. Our memories are notoriously poor, even for events that occurred just minutes before. And the act of writing and drawing helps solidify those memories. There's been a lot of recent research about people who take a lot of photographs versus those who draw or write. Those who take a lot of photographs have trouble recalling specific events or activities unless they're actually looking at their photographs. And this even has an official name. It's called the photo impairment effect. Whereas when you contrast the group of people who take photographs with those who draw or write, you find that those who kept a journal could later recall all kinds of memories about their vacation or gallery, and they could recall those memories even when they didn't have the photographs in front of them. As far as the benefits to our community, surprisingly, we know very little about the majority of species who share our planet. People tend to assume that the only new species to be discovered are in these exotic, far-off, uninhabited places, but there are many new species waiting to be discovered in our own backyards. California is one of the most biologically diverse places on Earth. It has many plants, fish, birds, insects, reptiles, and mammals that are found nowhere else in the world. It's also one of the most populous states in the US, and it is recognized, along with the rainforests, as one of the 34 global biodiversity hotspots. But so for all those people who say, I never go anywhere, and for your community, I want to point out Dr. Gilbert White, who never traveled in his lifetime more than 90 miles from Selborne, England. And he started in 1768 a journal called The Natural History and Antiquities of Selborne, which he later published. This volume is still in print all this time later and is still read. It's a delightful journal, and he makes some important observations. He talks about the London haze arriving from London, which scientists have used to plot the Industrial Revolution and the air pollution that occurred. This is a sketch of this. He inherited Timothy the tortoise from his aunt and recorded what Timothy ate. He also recorded the transit of Venus, and it's kind of poetry. Saw the planet Venus enter the disk of the sun. Just as the sun was setting, the spot was visible to the naked eye. Nightingale sings, wood owl hoots, fern owl chatters. And because we know his exact location and the time that he recorded this, astronomers today are able to enter his data point into their calculations of the transit of Venus. So these are a few of my journals, just a few. There are many different types of journals as there are people to put things in them. But all you really need are pencil and paper. That's it. So let's talk about a few types of journals. The focus of nature journaling is not creating beautiful works of art, although I do know artists who have beautiful works of art as their journals, but it's more about observing, seeing, and recording. And sketchbooks or scrapbooks and diaries are a very common type of journal that allow us to tell a story or a narrative. Here are a couple of historical examples. This one is from Raffinesque's drawing of tortoises along the Ohio River in 1818. And then there's also some plants found in New Holland from Dampierre's voyage in 1703, although these were probably drawn by his clerk, James Brand, not Dampier himself. And here are some observations from one of my sketchbooks. If you've ever seen prickly pear cactus or puntia, and you might have seen those white webs that are on the cacti, this is the insect that lives inside, cochineal. And cochineal is responsible for this gorgeous color red that's been used for centuries. This is a drawing of the underside and the top side of the female insect who creates those web shelters that we were looking at. But I want to make sure that you see, I want to come back to the journal as a place for thinking. This is the male who only lives 24 to 48 hours. But I don't know if you can see it. I have a little note to myself, 9 segments with a question mark, because I was trying to figure out, I was having trouble counting how many segments were on the antenna. So I write down questions, and then later with research and finding more of the insects, I was able to determine there are 10 segments, not 9. So you want to include those types of questions. I wonder if is a really important question to write in your sketchbook and notebook. One of the most common things I get from people, and the most common phrases that I hear is, oh, I can only draw stick figures. Well, you don't need to be an artist to keep a journal. Stick figures are wonderful. The most basic line drawings can convey a wealth of information. A simple line drawing can illustrate the flight pattern of a bird or the edge of a leaf or tracks left in the mud. And here's a wonderful illustration. I've included this in your handout of the inflorescence of flowers, and it's just circles and lines. Another great journal are lists. If you mention the word list, a group of birders, of course, instantly comes to mind, but lists come in many different forms. And I have a quick example of a list. This is an anonymous backyard in a suburban community anywhere in California. And yet, from the back patio on one summer day this past year, this is all the wildlife that was viewed in this backyard, along with some interesting behavior. For instance, the mockingbirds were plucking paper wasps out of the grass and then banging them on the sidewalk to get rid of the stingers before eating them. And then they were also plucking fur from the squirrels' tails as the squirrels ran along the fence. Collecting raw data to test a hypothesis is not just for scientists. And this frequently takes a digital format, but you may have heard of a BioBlitz, which collects information about observable species within a geographic area within a certain time period. And then there are also a wealth of apps for smartphones and for web, such as iNaturalist, which is used by individuals and citizen scientists interesting communities to identify species and gather information. So the other thing is, nature journaling does not need to just be pencil and paper, although that's what I'm concentrating on today. Sometimes it's just not convenient or appropriate to stop and journal. And there are lots of other media, for instance, sound recordings, now that we all have a smartphone in our pocket. I know one artist who recorded the sound of the wind in the trees all over the world that went with the leaves she was collecting to illustrate, and someone else who recorded 1 minute of a stream bed outside his home each day. Okay, so the first thing you want to include in your journal is location. If we were at the UCLA Botanic Gardens today, this is where we would be. There are all different kinds of ways for us to figure out where we are on the planet. Hand-drawn map is fine too. Whatever you need to accurately record where you were when you drew. Scale is important. There's a field guide that includes a picture of a penny to scale with all of the different drawings of the plants, which is just wonderful. And then all kinds of other things that you might see. observations, like I said before, questions, metaphors, comparisons, myths. You know, there are current popular myths about a lot of different plants and their effects, as well as historical and cultural stories about various plants. And, you know, I know this looks like a word cloud, but to tell you the truth, really the most important word for me personally on this would be snacks. Okay, so we'll dive into some quick drawing techniques and tips. If you are drawing as a gesture drawing, you want to draw very quickly and loosely. And one of the great ways to train your eye to coordinate with your hand is to not look down and draw. And that is something that will very quickly get your hand accustomed to just all by itself following what your eyes are observing. And people just are stunned, but really you want to stare at your subject and not look down at your paper. Your drawing will take care of itself over time as you begin to get the hang of that exercise. You want to draw from your wrist and your elbow and your arm very loosely, lightly, with one continuous line. You don't want to pick up the pencil at all. So this is an example. It's a red-eyed vireo fledgling. It was not going to stick around. It was just leaving the nest. So I scribbled as fast as I could without taking my eyes off of it until it left. Obviously, when I started another section, I glanced down at the paper. But what you're doing here is it's really like you're modeling clay. You're building form out of line. It doesn't have to be pencil. This is pen and ink and quick expressive lines. But here the lines follow the contour, the outside edges of the seed. This is a happy tree, not a California native. It originates in China. Digital media is great for this too. So this is a drawing on a tablet with a stylus of a trillium. Again, a loose gesture drawing, but this later became the foundation for a watercolor study of the same plant. So it's a great underpinning for what you might do as a more refined drawing later. It's also wonderful for things that move about quite a bit. If you're watching a line of people standing at the DMV, I'll guarantee that there's probably only about 6 positions that they will stand in, one of them looking down at their phone. When a subject moves, then you start a new drawing. When the subject comes back to that original posture, because most organisms only have a category of postures that they assume, then you can go back to that original drawing. I draw in meetings as well. I hope people think that I'm diligently taking notes, but it's another way to use a gesture drawing. And you can even draw in the dark. So this is from a concert, but not having to look down and draw means that you can draw anywhere at any time. The next ones are contour line drawings, and these are the opposite of a gesture drawing. It's a very slow, careful, clean line, and these are the types of drawings that you see that are used in field guides a lot because they're very clear and it shows you just the features of the plant or animal or insect that you need in order to identify it. So this is Nicotania glauca. It's an invasive species. It's a quick contour drawing. And you see these growing in disturbed sites like construction sites or freeway on-ramps or those types of places all over Southern California. But you can see how careful and slow the line is compared to the gestures. And this is Quercus agrifolia, which is our coast live oak. Again, a quick contour sketch that just shows the edges and the details of the plant. Shading is a different type of thing, and frequently if you've drawn a line drawing, shading might conflict with the line drawing a little bit. So a lot of times for shading, you can just put down the shading. So, and I've been having computer problems, so my apologies for things flipping around and going quickly. This is an heirloom corn, and this is just one of those, it's with a plain old-fashioned number 2 pencil. It's one of those Trader Joe's white Phalaenopsis. Can't get much more basic. You don't have to have just things floating on a white background. These are heirloom wheats grown in the Sonoran Desert that came over the 1700s. But the background is pencil that's filled in to highlight the wheat. And this is a rose hip drawn on toned paper in charcoal, white charcoal and black charcoal. Okay, so the common thing to really give people pause is perspective. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We can cover leaves first and talk a little bit about what we're looking for in leaves, or what I look for in leaves, and then talk about putting that into perspective. So we'll start with a big leaf, a fig leaf. It's a leaf with a very distinctive shape. It's the shape of the palm of a hand, and that's called palmate. And before we go any further, Victoria will back me up on this. Botanists have a name for everything. In fact, one of my favorite quotes is by a physicist, Enrico Fermi, who said, "If I knew the names of all the particles, I would be a botanist." But in your handout, you have, from Wikimedia Commons, a wonderful chart of various leaf shapes. And then also in the same handout is, from Wikimedia Commons as well, leaf margins, or the edges of a leaf. And it's a great scavenger hunt to go running around looking for leaves that conform to either the margins and or the leaf shapes. But if we go back to our fig leaf, you can see there's a huge difference between the back and the front in terms of color. And of course, there's also a really pronounced difference in the veins on the front versus the back. You can also see how the leaf attaches to the stem or the petiole. And yes, the botanists have names for all the different types of veins, so this is also in your packet. Our fig leaf also has a palmate formation of veins, which you see right there in the middle of the chart. I grabbed a few when they were blooming of our native California Matilaha poppies, which we'll look at next. This is Rhamnia coulteri. Some people call it the fried egg poppy. And here's an Epilobium canum, the California fuchsia, which is another native. A lot of California native plants have these gray-green leaves that help in our dry and hot, sunny climate. But I want you to notice how the leaves alternate up the stem, which is another botanical term. We'll come back to the Matilaha poppy in just a little bit. Here's an ornamental, a lavender, but it also originates from a Mediterranean climate, and so it has those same light gray-green leaves that are small and hairy, and that helps with the sunny, hot environment. This is a jasmine vine, and it shows an entirely different leaf arrangement. The leaves are directly opposite one another, which is another botanical term. So we want to look at how the leaves attach to the stem. And like the fig, this one is different color from the top and the back.
Hey, Deb, can I ask a question?
Sure. Let me pause this.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So Joanne was kind of saying whenever they draw, it's hard for them to let go of the self-criticism about how the drawing's not good enough, and it takes away from the enjoyment. So I wonder if you can comment, how do you let that go when you're drawing?
There are two things. The first is, if you're doing gesture drawings or contour drawings, one really great exercise is to put a sheet of paper over and completely cover up the hand that's doing the drawing. That divorces you from having to be self-critical and looking down at things. And it also takes you away from looking down, because once we look down, we're drawing from memory. We're not drawing from life. So if you cover up the hand that's drawing, and you just stare at your subject until you can almost feel the pencil there on the edge of the contour, and move your hand very slowly for this type of drawing. It's surprising how accurate those drawings look. In classes, what I'll do is I'll start people out drawing faces, pairing up, because that always causes a huge panic. And it does end up looking like the person, even though you're not being able to see your paper at all. There are two other points. There's a reason that I don't use an eraser usually and encourage others not to use an eraser. If I have an eraser and I've made a mistake and I erase it, it's pretty much guaranteed that I'll put a pencil line in the exact same place as the line that I just erased. So it's easier to use your mistakes to know where to make the next line. And then the other point to remember is it doesn't matter how good you get. Every single painting, every single drawing goes through a phase where you look at it and you think, if I could just start over, it would be so much better. And that's the point that you need to keep going, because all of those things just aren't done yet. So, I do have some artist friends who got over that. Everyone still feels that. It doesn't matter how much experience that you have. But I do know some artist friends who keep in their mind, I can burn this later. And they just keep going.
I love that. Thank you for sharing your tips.
I hope that answered the question. We can come back to that too. Okay, so we're in the grass family now, and let's see, maybe I wonder if I should back up here just a little bit so I have enough time. Like I said, my computer has been giving me fits all day, so I hope you bear with me with this. Okay, so the grass family is really interesting in leaves. Typically, not all the time, but typically most grass family plants have veins that run parallel to the margin of the leaf. And grass family is huge. It contains all of those crops that we eat, corn, wheat, and rice, of course. But there's another characteristic in the grass family. I'm going to stop that there. And go back just a little bit. This happens to be an orchid. It's not in the grass family, but typically, not all the time, but typically in the grass family, you'll find that the leaf wraps itself all the way around the stem in a sheath or a shawl. And that's another characteristic that you might look for. So once you start learning about, I hear some people say, well, why should I have to learn about the morphology of plants or the botany? Once you know what is typical for a family to look for, it gives you a clue as to things that you might want to look for to observe if there is a related species. But Mother Nature will always throw you for a loop. So for every rule that there will be an exception. No questions about it. So let's see, some leaves can get really, really complicated quickly. Let's see, is this going? This is the one leaf. I know it looks like a lot of leaves, but this is just one leaf. This is from a jacaranda tree, and the leaf is separated into leaflets, which are then again separated into leaflets. And this is what botanists call a bipinnate leaf. And the jacaranda is a member of the legume family. And so you see this type of leaf arrangement in a lot of legumes. And leaves have other parts that are important to note. Like, for instance, here's a rose leaf. These are 3 different roses, 3 different plants, 3 different sizes of leaves. And yet every single one of them have these stipules down at the bottom of the leaves. So that would be something else that would be important to observe and capture. Okay, so You're walking. My family and friends call it the botany two-step. We only get 2 steps before I have to examine something. Sometimes you don't have time to make a detailed sketch, so you can do a leaf rubbing instead. The instructions for this are included in your handout, and it's a quick way to capture a lot of information. You can capture information about the veins and the margins of your leaf. Some leaves might not work with this if it's particularly leathery or if it's particularly delicate. It might not work with this technique, but most leaves will. You can use crayons or soft pencil. In one of my sketchbooks is a leaf rubbing that I did of one of the leaflets for the Castanospermum australiae or Moreton Bay chestnut that was on the website for this talk. You can see that not only is there the leaf rubbing there on tissue paper to capture all the veins, but next to it on the opposite page, I've covered 2 of the leaflets with clear packing tape in my sketchbook. And that holds the color and the leaf surprisingly well for a long time. So this is also in your handout. Let's talk about drawing leaves in perspective. One of the hardest things people have is making that midrib, that center vein in the leaf, match up as the leaf folds over. So this is a quick and easy way to do it. You have to find the midrib first, and then you can draw the side, each side in a continuous line, pretending that your leaf is transparent. This will make the perspective work. Then you put curved lines over the top. Save your ruler straight lines for buildings. Most organic forms have curved lines. And then you can erase the lines that are supposed to be hidden. So if this same leaf can work going front ways, coming towards you, or going away from you backwards. And in your handout, there's a left-handed and right-handed worksheet. So if you want to sketch along there on the page, you can. The width of the leaf flat will match the width of the leaf folded, and then each parts of the folded leaf, if you add them together, will equal the measurement of a flat leaf if you're drawing everything on a 1-to-1 scale. So, and then there are many leaves that have serrated pointed edges or scalloped edges, and those are very difficult to get pointed in the right direction. So it's much easier if you draw the outside edge as a smooth line, and then you can go back in and put in the scallops or the points for the teeth afterwards. Okay, we'll take a whirlwind through flowers. I hope I'm not making everybody dizzy. But what works for leaves works for the petals of flowers also when you're drawing them. So it's a skill set that works for both. So if we go back to our Matillahaw poppy here, here we have a stem with a bud, a flower, and a capsule, one of the seeds. And you can see looking inside that this is what botanists would call a complete flower. It has both the male and the female parts. Begonias are an example of a plant that has male flowers and female flowers, but they both occur on the same plant. But then there are plants where you have male flowers and female flowers on completely separate plants. So it's important to take a look. Here's an old Matillahaw poppy that started a dissection forest, so you can clearly see the stamens and where the stamens have started to fall away. How a flower is pollinated is going to determine a lot about what parts are there and what it looks like. So our Matillahaw poppy here is pollinated by bees. If you look carefully at the stamens of wind-pollinated plants, you'll understand completely why they make us sneeze. And a lot of stamens are in a whorl around the pistil. It's important, just like the midrib for a leaf, it's really important that you get the stem accurate, that it comes all the way up through to the middle of the flower. Even if the petals are hiding the stem, that it's still, your viewer will notice if it's wrong. And then of course there's all these different fruits and seeds that are wonderful to draw. Here's a really complicated flower that people think are actually quite simple. But the daisy family is huge and very successful. This is not just one flower. This is a lot of flowers. On the inside, you have disc flowers. This is a close-up. Each one of those is an individual flower. And then on the outside, you have the ray flowers. Each thing that we think of as a petal is in fact a flower. So here we've cut it in half, and you can see the arrangement of the disc flowers. And here they are in a close-up. They bloom in a Fibonacci spiral, and Fibonacci is a whole talk all by itself. But here's one of those flowers all by itself. If this were on a sunflower eating type of plant, underneath the flower, that would develop into the seed that we eat. And here is one ray flower, what a lot of people would call a petal, and it's a complete flower in and of itself. It's important to look at symmetry in flowers. So this is our Mimulus guttatus. It's our seep monkey flower, a native, and it's bilateral symmetry. You can only divide it in one place to have one half mirror the other. I'm an example of bilateral symmetry. And here's our native blue-eyed grass, Ciceraceum bellum. This is a radial symmetry, so everything radiates out from the center like the spokes of a wheel, and whichever axis you choose to divide it on, that half will mirror the other. So when drawing, looking straight down at the flower, you can draw the outside circle, and then with little tick marks, mark where the tips, the centers of the petals go, or maybe how wide those petals are going to be also. A lot of petals have a midrib, just like the leaf does, because evolutionarily they come from a leaf structure. If you have a flower with really wide petals, like our flannel flower, Fremontodendron, then it's easier to mark both the center and the width of the flower to give you some more clues as to drawing it. And both of these are on the handout as well. Now, the real sticker point is when a circle lies back into space, it forms an ellipse. And there is a different type of putting an ellipse into space in your handouts using a cube as an example, because most of us draw a square easier than a circle. A lot of flowers have more complicated geometric shapes. So for instance, this is a gladiola from South Africa. You might have the circle up at the top, but they're more cone shape, and the cone might drop below the top of the circle. And depending on the angle of the flower, you might see more or less of the cone underneath. And then if you are looking at an inflorescence with multiple flowers, don't panic. You can break it down into the component shapes. So this is from a crown of thorns. Those flowers that are facing towards you are going to be a circle. And as those flowers move away back into space, they will become an ellipse. Another way to show depth, these are the seed pods of eucalyptus called a bushy Yates is the common name. I love it. But if you see the seed pods, I drew the seed pods in front darker. The ones that go back into space are lighter. And then we have, the more you observe flowers, the more fascinating they get. So this is a bougainvillea. We see them all over Southern California. The petals, or what people think of as petals, are not petals at all. They're actually a modified special leaf structure called a bract. And the flowers are those little white ones, things in the middle. And if it's an interesting story about how bougainvillea got its name, if you want to look it up. Okay, we'll go into what to journal. There are a lot of things that you can decide to journal. Any outdoor space where you spend a lot of time. These days, it might be our backyards. You can create your own florilegium. A florilegium is a compilation of illustrations of plants and flowers. And it was started in the 16th and 17th centuries when very wealthy people got all these exotic plants from all over the world, and they wanted to document them as a permanent record and to show off, frankly. But you can have a florilegium of your garden, a park, a garden like the UCLA gardens, nature preserve. You can document one. I know a lot of people who have chosen one species or one plant and documented it through the season as it changes. If you spend some time each day with it, you'll be surprised at what you learn. Or you can create a collection of any sorts of plants, and you can mix it all up too. I mean, I know we spoke about making recordings earlier, but a journal can extend way beyond drawing and writing on paper. I've seen journals created from the plant's point of view, poetry, creative writing, original music, all of them are good. And I've been thinking a lot, with us being locked down, there are a lot of other types of journals. For instance, I've started a journal of weeds. Dandelions are something that you can find everywhere. And this delightful little yellow flower, sometimes if you get out the magnifying glass and crawl around in the grass or the dirt, this is a delightful little tiny yellow flower. It grows on what looks to be clover at first glance. But then if you examine it carefully, you find these nasty little burrs, which of course gives it its common name, burr clover. And quite some time ago, I illustrated this, paying attention to the roots, because it is in the legume family and it fixes nitrogen with nodules on the roots. And then there's our refrigerator. There's, of course, all the different fruit, and that comes readily to mind. But there are all kinds of other types of things. Squash is in season right now. And all kinds of vegetables. This is not the one I drew because we ate the one that I drew, but this was a really quick sketch in colored pencil. I didn't have the right colors. Cabbages are great for leaf structure. And there are a lot of things that you can use to start a kitchen garden. So if you slice off the bottom and put it in some water in a shallow pie plate or pan, it will you can watch it start to regrow. But if you have a cabbage, then you can see it actually has a very short stem inside. Bok choy is another one. If you cut off the bottoms and stick it in some water, I think it starts growing really within a couple of days. And you can have little new baby leaves. Celery will do the same thing. In celery, we eat the stems, not the leaves. And scallions, I haven't had to buy scallions in a while. You simply chop them off, put them in some water, and I swear the next day they are growing again. If you buy a package of leaves like spinach, you can see all different types of sizes and shapes that come, because you're not buying just one plant. You're getting a whole bunch of different plants. And then, of course, there are all the plants that we eat, the flowers. So broccoli, we're eating the buds. If you stick that in some water on a sunny windowsill instead of eating it, you'll get these nice little yellow flowers out of it. And cauliflower is, again, something that we're eating the buds. This is the kind that, of course, you get when you go to the store. And if you slice it in half, you'll see the stem with the branches out. But this is one of the ones in the garden. This is what it looks like if you just let it go and it's had ash from the fires all over it. And this is when it starts really sprouting out. These are the flowers that you get if you let cauliflower go. So I know I've raced through things, and I'm hoping you have lots of questions, and we can answer them now. You should also feel free to email me if you want, or get in touch with Jules, and she will get in touch with me. But hoping that you have lots of questions, or that you've been able to do some drawings, because it would be great fun to see drawings posted.
Thank you so much, Deb. That was fantastic.
Sorry, it was such a whirlwind.
For everyone who is at home, thank you, everyone. Let's see if we get a few questions coming in. There's a lot of comments that you're fantastic, and this was all really interesting. People like hearing suggestions about how to get out of that self-critical space with writing. Let's see if anyone else has. Okay. So Joanne Taylor has a question. What are your thoughts about drawing from photographs?
That is a really excellent question, and it is really controversial. So I will be honest right up front. There are times that I have to draw from photographs. Maybe I can't get to a species, you know, it's out in the field and a botanist sends me photos, all different kinds of reasons, or something dies really quickly. I do take a lot of reference photos. Sometimes I have to draw from photos, but I tend not to because I draw better from life, and I also observe and notice things more when I'm drawing from life. What's interesting about drawing from photographs is the photo pre-compresses the space for you. So in doing so, it does it differently than the human eye does. So if you are drawing from a photo, a lot of times you are perceiving that space differently than you would if you were drawing from life. And I don't know, you know, I didn't cover, one of the things I talk about when teaching is, you know, you see all those like cartoons of the artist with one eye closed and their thumb up to measure. The one eye closed is important. So I'm going to do a little tangent here. I don't know how many people know what their dominant eye is. It has nothing to do with whether or not you're right or left-handed, but it's important for drawing. So if you if you make your hands form a triangle and you hold them at arm's length and you look with both eyes open and fix on a point, if you close one eye and then close the other eye, one eye will show what it is that you were looking at with both eyes open. The other eye, it will jump out of the picture. The eye where you could see the same thing that you could see with both eyes open is your dominant eye. And if you look at any subject and with your dominant eye, that will automatically compress the space and make it, instead of 3D, 2D, and make it easier to draw. I know a lot of people who, photographs are very seductive. So you can learn a lot drawing from photographs, but there are people that I know for whom it becomes a little addictive. It becomes a crutch. And so you want people to be able to do both, I guess, is the short answer to that. And then a lot of times it's just really hard to see some of these things in a photograph. So a lot of times if I can turn the plant over and see how it wraps around and connect, I might draw it differently. I hope that answered it. It was sort of a long-winded answer.
That was great. I'm actually going to show a couple of these comments on the screen so you can see them. Amazing. I learned a lot. And we heard from some other ones here. I think this is really helpful for biology students.
You know, this is great for, you know, for any subject, but especially for biology. There is several of my colleagues that are professors at various universities who are biology professors, and they assign their students to keep a journal, because it really changes how you think. And the other good tip is if you learn to do, like if you do the exercise where you've covered up your hands with a piece of paper and you learn to draw without looking at your paper, you are the best person in the world to draw while looking in the microscope. So, I think that got me my first job, frankly, because I could sit and stare in the microscope and just draw without having to look back and forth to the paper. So it's a really handy technique to have.
And we got some love for the refrigerator one. I think that was like a very creative and a great idea to think about. We talk about that at the garden a lot, how sometimes people become blind to the plants in their lives and don't notice how we use plants every single day. And so seeing those, what's in our fridge, I think is really cool.
Yes, what's in our fridge, especially these days with the fires, when we just couldn't go outside. It was like, okay, what's in the refrigerator?
We have one here. I'll just pop this one up. Loved your presentation. So good.
Oh, thank you.
And another question here from Human. Thanks, Deborah. I know when you started to draw.
Oh, that's a really good question. I drew a lot when I was a kid, but it was not something to be taken seriously, right? How are you going to earn your living and feed yourself if you're drawing? So I really didn't get serious about it until college. And when I went to school, it was during the heyday of abstract art. So as a fine art major, you couldn't have anything representational in your artwork. Everything was supposed to be abstract. And luckily for me, I took a scientific illustration class as part of the biology and botany coursework. And that was it. I was hooked. I think that's when I really started seriously working on it. And then, of course, sometimes life gets in the way, right? So sometimes there are other things that you do. But I've always gone back to drawing. And for me, it's sort of my meditation, maybe even my medication. It's something I have to do.
Yeah. How spending time in nature is so good for your mental health, your physical health, and so doing it in a way where you're kind of blocking out all the noise and you're really focusing, I think is really incredible.
Well, and the other thing is, it's interesting when you read about botanical artists and illustrators, a lot of them live a very, very long time, well into their 90s and 100s. And I think it has something to do with slowing down and going through the process of drawing.
I have a technical question here.
Okay.
From Hip Talk. Thank you so much. It's interesting. How do I stop transferring on the opposite pages?
Yes. Okay. So there are people who come home and they spray their journal pages with fixative. I don't do that for a number of reasons. I don't like the fact that it's toxic. I can't stand the smell. And a lot of times I find that it kind of changes some of the tones and gradations of the pencil, especially if you're doing shading. Maybe I don't use it right, but I tend not to use it. But then that means that you're either putting up with those smudges going on to the opposite pages, or a lot of times what I'll do, I have a whole stack of lightweight tracing paper that's cut the same size as the sketchbook for all my different sketchbooks, and I put them in a pocket in an envelope and that's taped into the back. So then I can use those for leaf rubbings if there's something delicate that needs a thinner paper, but I can also use them as a slip sheet, and I just tape them in so that it doesn't transfer to the other side. And I end up with it all over my face. I mean, I've learned to check myself in the mirror before going out on errands because I've had people staring at me and I've realized I've had black all over.
Occupational hazards. I know with gardening, we often get the dirt mustache here at the
Yes.
We've had some other supportive people are heading outside to sketch right now.
Oh, okay. Yes.
And here's another. This one I think is so good to hear.
Yes.
Quarantine.
Thank you.
So I think a lot more people have been going outside and going for walks in their neighborhood than maybe they used to. But also a lot of people are spending so much more time indoors than they are used to. So I really hope that this does inspire people to spend the day outside, to get out there.
I hope so. And, it's funny because we were quarantined before and complaining about, just being able to essentially take walks around the neighborhood. And then we were locked in with the smoke from the fires and really locked in, windows taped and not be able to go outside at all. And we realized how much nicer it was to be able to, enough with the complaining, right? So yes, being able to look at things even in the refrigerator, that's a world outside of where I am in my head, is a big help.
Be a transportating experience. Okay, I've got
Thank you, Ella.
Question from Kathleen Wong. Can you describe a little bit about how to organize a journal?
Okay. I have friends that I admire and colleagues that I admire and they have journals that are a specific subject. Let's say, I'm doing all these, I'm working up to a big illustration of these heirloom corn plants. So, they would have journals that are nothing but the corn. Or I know people who date their journals. I am so bad. I pick out a journal based on how I feel that morning. Like, oh, I'll use the red one because I feel like using that paper or that size. So that means that my journals are not organized. If I am, so I'm going to just admit that up front. I talk a good game, but I've never been able to implement it. So what I end up doing is when I'm working on a project and I sit down like that Castanospermum, it was spread out over maybe 10 different journals. So what I'll do then is I will sit down with all my journals piled up around me and I'll flip through them and mark which pages I need to reference. Now, there is one colleague and good friend, Laura Kalgostender, that has a great journal system. She has a spread. It's a perpetual journal. So she has a spread for each day of the year. And she marks that date. So, today's date would be October 10th. And it's one spread. And so every single year she goes back until the entire thing is filled. And she might do a little drawing on that page. And one of the things that's genius about that is it breaks the ice. You don't have to be having the heart palpitations because you're staring at a blank page. So you already have a little drawing there. But the other thing that she's discovered over the years is, when you look at certain weeks in August, that's when the family always goes camping, because that's when the vacation time is. And so you can see, and she'll write where they are, so you can see little drawings from all the different camping that they've done over a period of several years. So that's a really lovely way to organize a journal, and I keep meaning to do one of those myself.
And I love that you mentioned about the sort of the questions like I wonder, and using keeping a ruler or some sort of scale in your notebook. So some of these tools you can access. But yeah, I think there's no wrong way to organize a journal. Let's see, just a little more love.
Thank you. Oh, and the landscape architects, a lot of times you're looking at plan views that, as a landscape architect, you need to move fast. You need to get these things out. And so you're using templates of plan views. But a lot of times they don't show the habit of the plant very well. How it's going to go over the landscape as it grows. So I do know a couple of landscape architects that have taken to creating their own templates, essentially, which is great. So you draw it, you scan it, and then you can use it on all your different plants.
Fun to hear. This is fantastic. I'm glad we can share a resource for your students.
Absolutely.
Pass it forward. Okay, and then we have, what's your favorite brand or type of journal to use?
I have an affinity for using a hot press watercolor paper. Even though I might be doing things in pencil or colored pencil, ink, all of those things tend to lend themselves to a hot press surface. Cold press surface is nice too, and will put up with a whole lot more abuse. You get used to using, a lot of people use hot press surfaces, very smooth surfaces for botanical art, just because you want to make sure that people don't interpret the texture of the paper to be part of the texture of the plant. So I've just gotten the habit of using a smooth surface. But cold press paper works really well too. I do have some journals that have just drawing paper in it, and that little rose hip you saw, I have some toned papers that I use just for charcoal because they're set up for pastel and charcoal. But by far my favorite is the hot press watercolor.
And I have a follow-up paper question for doing the rubbings.
Okay, so rubbings, you want super cheap paper. So the lightweight stuff that you buy on sale that goes into your printer, that works great. I'll wait for a sale at the art supply stores, and I'll buy the really cheap, nasty tracing paper that you can barely see through, but it's really light and flimsy, and I'll chop that up. The lighter papers tend to show more of the delicate veins. So and there are always those things. I'll confess, I've brought home specimens and put them on the scanner or the copier machine. You have to make sure that your office mates are okay with that, and you have to clean up after yourself. But it needs to be substantial enough that it can stand up to the abuse of coloring over it, but thin enough that you can really get cheap. I think it was Picasso who said when art critics get together, they talk about composition and color, and when artists get together, they talk about where to find the cheapest art supplies. Cheap.
Got some more, just a little bit of love and focus on how we see the world and how important this is for doing that.
Yes.
Again. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
So I think we're going to wrap up here. It's been about an hour. I want to let Deb enjoy her Saturday too. But I want to thank you so much, Deborah. This was really incredible. I think you inspired many, many people today, including myself. And like I said, I hope you all can come out and visit the UCLA Mildred E. Mathias Botanical Garden time. But I'm glad we're able to do some of these things virtually to connect and to think about the nature that's right in our naturehoods, all around us all the time. And if you do some illustrating and you want to share it with us, we'd love to see what you do. Today's. Let me get this information back up on the screen. Oops. You can share it at UCLA Botanical. You can tag MEMBG, or you can email it to botanicalgarden@ucla.edu, and we'll share some of our favorites on our social media. And look out for a follow-up email. We'll send a few resources in there and a short survey to hear. I saw in the chat some people, they really want to see more of you, Deborah. So hopefully.
Oh, that'd be lovely. And I will put together, I did drop a list of some resources, both online and print, old-fashioned books. So I can go ahead and get that to you, Jules. We can send that out. But yes, any questions that all of you have, and certainly happy creating.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Deborah. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
And have fun, everyone at home. We can't wait to see what you create.